It was late September of 2018, about 3 weeks into my first semester at a mid-sized university in Ohio. The heat of summer had broken, but the days still held on to that sticky warmth that lingered into the evenings. Our dorm was an old brick building, 4 floors, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and industrial cleaner no matter how much they tried to air it out. I lived on the 3rd floor, room 317, with my roommate Dylan. The building itself had an odd layout. Most hallways were straight, but ours bent twice, with room 325 sitting alone at the very end like an afterthought. Everyone talked about that room, usually in whispers, but not in the usual haunted dorm legend way. It wasn't covered in some dramatic backstory about a student dying there. It was just avoided. The door was always closed, blinds drawn, and no one ever saw the person who lived there. My RA once told me not to bother knocking if I needed to borrow something because whoever's in there doesn't like visitors. That stuck with me. The first time I noticed something off was on a Sunday night. Dylan had gone home for the weekend and I was alone. The hall was dead quiet except for the hum of the soda machine down by the stairwell. I just finished brushing my teeth when I realized I could hear faint tapping. At first I thought it was pipes or maybe someone typing. But as I walked down the hall, toothbrush still in hand, I realized it was coming from 325. Top, top, passa, top. I froze in front of the door. The tapping stopped. I backed away, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the next night, as I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard it again. Only this time it was louder, almost deliberate, like someone drumming their nails against wood. Dylan heard it too. He sat up and looked at me with wide eyes. "It's that room," he whispered. We both stayed quiet for a while, listening until it finally stopped. Over the next week, the sound became almost regular. Not every night, but often enough. Sometimes it was tapping, other times a dragging sound like furniture scraping against the floor. One night, Dylan swore he heard muffled talking, but when I got up and pressed my ear against the door, all I heard was silence. That we weren't the only ones. A girl from down the hall named Erin mentioned it one morning in the lounge. She said she'd been walking back from the bathroom at 2 in the morning when the door to 325 creaked open a few inches. She didn't see anyone inside, but she swore she felt someone watching her. She said she hurried past, and when she glanced back, the door was closed again. The RA brushed it off. Old buildings make noises. Don't work yourselves up. But even she looked uncomfortable when we pushed her about it. Then came the night Dylan decided to be an idiot. He'd had a few drinks at a party and came back laughing, louder than he should have been. He marched straight down the hall and pounded on the door to 325, shouting, "Yo, what's your deal, man? You're creeping everybody out." The entire hall went silent. Even drunk, Dylan must have felt it because his voice cracked as he added, "Come on, say something." There was nothing. No footsteps, no rustle, not even the usual hum of the air vent. Just silence pressing in around us. Dylan muttered something under his breath and stumbled back to our room. I locked the door that night, which I almost never did. The next morning, there were deep scratches across Dylan's side of the door, right over the lock. 4 long, uneven lines, gouged into the wood. He swore up and down that someone was messing with us, but none of us ever heard anyone in the hall. The RA filed a maintenance request, but when the repair guys came, they said the wood looked more splintered out than carved in, as if the scratches had been made from the inside. After that, Dylan stopped laughing about it. He started keeping his shoes on even in the room, and he moved his bed further from the wall. He claimed he kept waking up to someone whispering near his head, but whenever he turned on the light, there was nothing there. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. I didn't know whether to believe him until it happened to me. It was a Thursday night, around 1:30. I'd been writing an essay on my laptop when I noticed something moving under the crack of our door. Shadows, faint but deliberate, as if someone was standing outside. I held my breath, waiting for a knock, but instead I heard that same dragging sound, only this time it was right outside our room. It scraped slowly across the carpet, stopping just outside. Then the whispering started. Not words I could understand, more like a low murmur, the sound of someone speaking through clenched teeth. I was frozen in my chair, staring at the door. The handle rattled once, lightly, as though tested. My chest was tight, my ears ringing. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When I finally worked up the courage to open the door, the hall was empty. The next day, Dylan and I asked around again, desperate to know who lived in 325. No one had a name. No one had seen a face. Mail came sometimes, small envelopes slipped under the door by the RA, but no packages, no visitors, nothing. Erin swore she heard two voices inside once, but another guy on our floor claimed he'd seen the RA slide an envelope under the door, and then when he glanced back it was gone, though no one had opened the door. Toward the end of the semester, Dylan transferred out. He couldn't take it anymore. He told me one morning, flat and hollow, that he'd woken up to see someone standing at the foot of his bed. Not moving, not breathing, just watching. He refused to describe it, just said it wasn't possible for anyone to be there because the door was still locked. He packed up and left within a week that I stayed, but I never walked past 325 at night again. The door remained closed, the blinds drawn, the tapping and dragging coming and going without reason. By spring, I'd grown used to it, in the way you get used to living near train tracks. You notice when it isn't there more than when it is. When I came back for sophomore year, I found out something that still unsettles me. The RA told me very casually that 325 was empty. No one had ever been assigned there. The university had marked it as unavailable for housing for at least 5 years. But the noises didn't stop. Even now, when I visit campus and walk past that old dorm, I find myself staring up at the 3rd floor. And more often than not, I see the blinds in room 325 shift, just slightly, as if someone inside has been watching me the whole time. It was late October during my sophomore year at a state university in Pennsylvania. The kind of night where the wind rattled the bare trees and dead leaves skittered across the sidewalks like dry insects. I remember the exact time because I'd just finished a late study session at the library. It was 12:47 a.m. when I swiped my card to get back into my dorm. I lived in Hammond Hall, a squat concrete building from the 1970s that looked more like an old office block than student housing. My room was 204, right at the start of the 2nd floor hallway. The halls smelled faintly like microwave popcorn mixed with mildew, and the fluorescent lights always buzzed overhead. Most nights, the floor was quiet by midnight, but I noticed something odd right away. Someone was walking the hall, slowly, their footsteps dragging just a little on the linoleum. I unlocked my door and slipped inside quickly, shutting it behind me. My roommate, Claire, was asleep already, bundled under her comforter. I was careful not to wake her as I changed into sweats and climbed into my bed by the window. The footsteps outside stopped a few minutes later, and I thought nothing more of it. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a key turning in our lock. At first, I thought it was Claire. Maybe she'd stepped out and I hadn't noticed. But then I realized she was still asleep in her bed across from mine. I froze, clutching my blanket. The metal clicked again, a slow, deliberate sound, like someone testing a ring of keys until they found the right one. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make my voice work. Claire stirred and sat up, whispering, "What was that?" Before I could answer, the handle rattled hard, like whoever was out there was frustrated. Then it stopped. Silence pressed in. We both sat frozen in the dark, staring at the door. Finally, we heard the footsteps again, moving away down the hall. We barely slept the rest of the night. In the morning, we reported it to the RA. She told us it was probably just a drunk kid who'd gotten the wrong door. But when we explained that someone was trying multiple keys, her face tightened. "I'll mention it to campus security," she said, though her tone made it sound like she wanted us to drop it. That should have been the end of it. But 2 nights later, it happened again. This time I was awake, scrolling on my phone under the blanket. At exactly 1:56 a.m., the sound of a key scraping against the lock started up again. My heart leapt into my throat. I nudged Claire awake, and we both listened as the intruder methodically tried again. We whispered about calling the police, but before either of us could move, the sound stopped. This time, though, it didn't fade away down the hall. Instead, there was a soft knock. Not the casual kind of knock you give a friend's door, but slow, deliberate, 3 times. Neither of us answered. After a few minutes, the footsteps moved off. We didn't report it that time. Part of me thought no one would believe us, and the other part was afraid of drawing attention. But from that night on, we started pushing a chair under the handle before going to bed. Weeks passed. The semester got busier. For a while, it seemed like maybe whoever it was had given up. Then one freezing night in November, everything escalated. It was around 3 a.m. when the noise woke me, not the lock this time, but the sound of the door actually opening. The chair scraped across the tile, shoving forward a few inches as the handle turned. Claire shot upright, gasping, "Oh my God!" I could see the door shift inward, just enough to reveal a sliver of the dark hallway outside. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The door froze. Then, slowly it clicked shut again. Silenced, I ran to it and flipped the deadbolt we'd never used before. Claire was shaking, saying over and over, "How did they get the key? How did they get the key?" The next morning, we confronted our RA again, this time refusing to leave until she gave us some answers. She looked pale when we explained, and after a long pause, she admitted something. This floor, it had an incident a few years ago. A student disappeared. She lived in 207. Her keys were never found. We stared at her. "You think someone still has them?" Claire asked. The RA wouldn't meet our eyes. Security swore they changed the locks afterward, but I don't know. I really don't. From that night on, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever tried to get into our room wasn't just some random drunk kid. They never tried any other door. Just ours. Always ours. Over winter break, I told my parents everything. They begged me to transfer dorms, but housing was full. So when spring semester started, I returned reluctantly to 204. Claire had dropped out, citing personal reasons. I've lived here alone since January. And almost every week, sometime between 1 and 3 a.m., I still hear the slow scrape of a key in the lock. Only now, there's no one else awake to hear it with me. It was the middle of October when I transferred into Ashford University. My first day on campus was cold, with the kind of damp chill that seeps into your clothes and lingers in your bones. The trees had already shed most of their leaves, and the sky stayed locked in that perpetual gray where you couldn't tell if it was morning or late afternoon. My dorm assignment was in Hanlon Hall, an older brick building that looked like it belonged in a black and white photograph rather than a functioning campus that I moved in on a Tuesday, a strange time since most people had settled in weeks before. When I dragged my suitcase up to the second floor, the hall was quiet. There were posters taped to doors, bands, quotes, little things that marked each room as claimed, but the door to mine was bare, like no one had bothered. I unlocked it, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't bad exactly, but it was distinct. A mixture of old detergent, dust, and something faintly sweet, like a candle that had burned out a long time ago. The room was small but manageable. 2 beds, 2 desks, and 2 closets side by side. One bed was stripped bare, clearly mine, but the other was made neatly with folded sheets and a pillow tucked in place. I assumed it was left over from the last resident. The closets told a different story though. Mine was empty, but the other one wasn't. On the shelves there were clothes stacked in perfect piles. Jeans, sweaters, even socks. They didn't look forgotten. They looked ready to be worn. I went down to the front desk and asked the RA about it. Her name was Claire, a senior with tired eyes and the kind of practiced politeness you get from dealing with freshmen all the time. "Yeah, sometimes stuff gets left behind," she said. "People transfer or drop out and don't come back for their things. Just use the other closet and leave that one alone. We'll deal with it at the end of the semester." It didn't sound like the right answer, but I didn't push. I just moved my things into the empty space and tried not to think about the folded clothes on the other side of the room. For the first few nights, nothing felt strange. Hanlon was an old building and it made noises at night. Pipes clanging, floors creaking, the faint hum of radiators coming alive. My window overlooked the back courtyard, and sometimes I'd hear voices drifting up late at night, laughter carried by the cold air. The kind of background noise you get used to. But on the 4th night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't explain. It was soft, almost delicate, like the faint rattle of hangers brushing against each other. At first, I thought it was a dream. The kind of half-waking moment where your brain fills in blanks with nonsense. I rolled over, pulled the blanket tighter, and told myself it was nothing. The next night, it happened again. I woke around 2 in the morning to the same sound, hangers shifting, a slow drag of plastic against the metal rod. I sat up and stared at the closet. It was closed, the old wooden door shut tight, but I could feel it. Like something behind that door was moving, careful not to be heard, careful not to disturb me. I whispered, "Hello?" The sound stopped immediately. I stayed awake until the first gray light crept through the blinds. Over the next week, the pattern kept up. Every few nights, like clockwork, the sound of the closet stirring woke me. Sometimes it was faint shuffling like fabric brushing against fabric. Other times it was more distinct, the scrape of a hanger sliding across the rod. Each time I checked, the door was closed, the clothes neatly folded inside. Whenever I dared open it during the day, I mentioned it to Claire again, trying to keep my voice casual. "Are you sure nobody's still assigned to that room?" I asked. Like, maybe there was some mistake? She gave me a look. "No one's living there but you. Trust me. If you're creeped out, I can put in a request for a room change, but it'll take weeks." I told her I'd be fine. But I wasn't. One Friday night, I stayed up late studying. Around midnight, I heard the sound again. This time, instead of freezing in bed, I stood up and walked over to the closet. My heart was pounding so hard it made me lightheaded. I put my hand on the knob and hesitated that I opened it in one quick motion. Nothing. Just the same folded clothes, the same faint smell of detergent and that sweet, faded scent I couldn't place. But the hangers were swinging slightly, as if someone had touched them only moments before that. I told myself it had to be a draft. Hanlon was old, full of gaps and cracks where air slipped through. But the window was shut tight, locked from the inside. The next day I decided to test something. I placed one of my notebooks across the folded sweaters, just enough to disturb their perfect neatness. When I came back later that evening, the notebook was on the floor, the clothes refolded with the same precise edges as before. That I didn't touch the closet again after that. Weeks went by. I got used to the sounds, as horrible as that sounds. I'd wake up, hear the hangers move, pull the blanket over my head and wait for it to stop. It became routine, almost background noise. Until one night, something changed. That I woke to the sound, but it wasn't hangers this time. It was whispering. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, someone talking in the courtyard. But the words were too close, too soft, too distinct. A voice, low and female, murmuring from inside the closet. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. That I sat frozen, staring at the closed door. My throat was dry, and every instinct screamed not to answer. The whispering stopped. The silence pressed down heavy. Then, slowly, the closet door creaked open a few inches, though I hadn't moved from bed. That was the first night I left my room and slept in the lounge downstairs. That I started doing that more often, finding excuses to stay out late, crashing on friends' floors, anything to avoid being alone in that room at night. People noticed, asked if I was okay, but I never told them the truth. What would I even say? That my closet was haunted. The last night I spent in that room, it was pouring rain. I'd been caught coming back from the library and didn't have the energy to sleep anywhere else. I locked the door, turned off the light, and tried to convince myself I was being stupid. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up cold. Not just chilly, cold, like the heat had been sucked out of the room. I sat up and saw the closet door wide open. Standing inside, barely visible in the darkness, was a girl. She wasn't moving, just standing perfectly still between the shelves, her head tilted slightly like she was studying me. Her clothes matched the folded ones on the shelves. Her hair hung limp and damp, as if she had just come in from the rain. That I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My body locked, my breath stuck in my throat. She didn't step forward. She just raised one hand slowly and touched the row of hangers, making them sway and clink softly together. Then, in the faintest whisper, I heard her say, "Why are you in my room?" I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up in the hallway, my back against the opposite wall, my door shut tight. The next day, I filed for a room change. They moved me across campus within the week. That I never went back to Hanlon Hall, but sometimes when I walk past it, I glance up at the second floor. My old window is always dark, but I can't shake the feeling someone's still standing inside. Waiting, and every time I think about it, I wonder if the clothes are still folded neatly in that closet. Or if she finally took them with her. It was the fall semester of 2019 when this started, my sophomore year at a mid-sized university in Pennsylvania. My dorm building wasn't new, but it wasn't exactly ancient either. It was built sometime in the late 70s, a long rectangular structure with 4 floors of nearly identical rooms, each one small enough to remind you how much you were paying in tuition for very little comfort. My room was on the 3rd floor, facing west, which meant in the evenings I got a clear view of the football field lights from my desk. The walls were cinder block, painted off-white, and the air always smelled faintly like old radiator heat mixed with whatever people were microwaving down the hall. My roommate Ethan was one of those people you never expect to become close friends with. He was quiet, lanky, and perpetually pale, with this habit of pulling his hoodie over his head whenever he walked around campus. But we got along fine, mostly because we didn't get in each other's way. He stayed up late with his headphones on, and I was usually buried in books from my architecture classes. We weren't best friends, but we coexisted comfortably, which was all you could ask for in a dorm situation. The first time we heard the voices, it was late September, just as the evenings were starting to cool off. I remember because I had the window cracked, trying to let the damp autumn air replace the stuffiness of the room. I was half asleep when I noticed Ethan sitting up in bed, earbuds out, staring toward the corner where the air vent was. "You hear that?" he whispered. At first, I thought he meant the faint buzz of someone's speaker down the hall, but when I listened closer, I realized the sound was different. It was coming from the vent, a low, muffled murmur like 2 or 3 people having a conversation just out of earshot. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence of speech, the pauses, the occasional chuckle. "It's probably the guys next door," I said, rolling over, but Ethan shook his head. "No one's in there. I checked earlier. They moved out." I didn't argue. Dorm walls were thin and sound traveled in strange ways. Still, something about it unsettled me. The voices weren't the loud, drunken tones you'd expect from college students. They were soft, deliberate, and steady, like people speaking with great care not to be overheard. The next night it happened again around the same time, just past midnight. Ethan had a notebook open and was jotting things down in a neat, obsessive script. "They start at 12:07, he said without looking up. "You're timing them?" I asked. He just nodded. "Always 12:07. And it goes until about 1. Sure enough, the voices began, faint but distinct, drifting through the vent. This time I thought I caught a word, "below," though I couldn't be sure. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the thin metal grate, and felt a strange chill radiating out of it, colder than the rest of the room. "Hey," Ethan whispered, "they're not speaking English." I frowned, listening harder. He was right. The rhythm of the words was off, almost like a language I didn't recognize, though occasionally 1 or 2 English words slipped through, distorted and half-swallowed. The following day between classes, we decided to check it out. The vent system in our building was old, but every 2 rooms shared a direct connection. Our vent should have lined up with the one in the room next door, 317. I knocked on the door out of curiosity, but there was no answer. A girl passing by told us nobody had lived in 317 since before she moved in last year. Apparently, there had been some kind of water damage and the administration never reassigned it. That didn't sit right with me. If the room was unoccupied, then where were the voices coming from? We managed to peek inside later that evening when one of the RAs unlocked it during rounds. The room was bare. No bed, no desk, not even blinds on the window. Just a strip of stained carpet and a single vent cover on the far wall, identical to ours. When I crouched down in front of it, I half expected to hear the faint murmur again, but the air was silent. "Creepy, right?" the RA said, flipping off the light. "This room gives me the chills. Feels wrong somehow." That night, Ethan and I both lay awake waiting. Sure enough, at 12:07, the voices started again. Louder this time, as if they knew we'd gone looking. I could hear a woman's voice clearly now, low and melodic, followed by a man's voice that was harsher, strained. I whispered through the vent, "Hello?" The voices stopped instantly. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, almost too faint to catch, came the sound of someone whispering back. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was mocking, like laughter swallowed into a hush. My skin crawled. Ethan sat up in bed, pale as paper. "Don't talk to them," he said. His voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "Just don't." After that night, things escalated. Objects in our room started to feel misplaced. My sketch pencils stacked neatly when I was sure I'd left them scattered, Ethan's hoodie folded on his chair though he always tossed it on the floor. The voices grew bolder too. Sometimes I'd hear my own name breathed faintly through the vent. Once, in the middle of a rainstorm, I woke to the sound of someone sobbing softly, almost right above my head. Ethan began to unravel. He stopped going to classes, stopped eating much. One evening, I came back from the library to find him sitting cross-legged in front of the vent, notebook open, his face inches from the grate. He was whispering back, answering questions I couldn't hear. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're teaching me things," he said without looking away. "Things you wouldn't understand." That night, I pushed his bed across the room as far from the vent as possible. But at 12:07, the voices came through louder than ever, filling the entire room, a steady stream of whispers overlapping until they became a roar of hushed tones. Ethan sat bolt upright, smiling in the dark. I snapped. I grabbed my phone and called campus security. When the officer arrived, the voices had stopped. Ethan sat silently on his bed, staring at the floor. I tried to explain, but the officer just gave me a strange look and said he'd file a report. Ethan didn't say a word the whole time. The next morning, his side of the room was empty. No clothes, no books, no hoodie. Just gone. I went to the housing office, but they told me Ethan had officially withdrawn from the university overnight. No explanation. No forwarding address. For the rest of the semester, I lived in that room alone. I tried to convince myself it had all been stress, lack of sleep, maybe even some weird acoustics in the vent system. But every night at 12:07 the voices returned. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they just whispered my name over and over until the sun came up. And last night, for the first time, I heard Ethan's voice among them. It was February of 2019, and I was a sophomore living in one of the older dorm buildings at a small college in upstate New York. The kind of place where the winters came early and hung on late, leaving the campus coated in gray slush and salt, where the air smelled of damp coats, old radiators, and whatever someone had burned in the dining hall. Our dorm was called Ashford Hall, a 4-story brick rectangle built in the 1960s, and it always felt a little out of step with the rest of campus. The newer dorms had clean lounges with flat-screen TVs and wide, airy hallways. Ashford had flickering fluorescent lights, thin doors that rattled when someone slammed one down the hall, and pipes that groaned at night as if the building itself was trying to breathe. It was a Sunday night, around 9:30. The snow had started falling again, small flakes drifting past the yellow glow of the street lamps. I remember looking out my window at the empty campus walkways, at how the lampposts cast sharp shadows over the untouched snow. My roommate, Melissa, was sitting cross-legged on her bed, headphones in, mouthing the lyrics to whatever she was listening to. I had a paper due the next morning and was typing half-heartedly when the first faint smell reached us. That acrid, sharp bite of something electrical overheating. At first, I thought someone had burned popcorn in the basement lounge again. It happened all the time. But the smell didn't fade. It grew thicker, seeping into the vents, clinging to the back of my throat. I remember coughing and saying, "Do you smell that?" Melissa pulled out one earbud, sniffed, and wrinkled her nose. "Yeah, gross. Probably the laundry room." She put the earbud back in. Not long after that, I heard the muffled sound of footsteps and doors opening in the hallway. Someone shouted, "Is that smoke?" And there was nervous laughter. Then came the alarm, except here's the thing, I didn't hear it first. I saw it. A red strobe began flashing in the hallway, lighting up the crack under our door in steady pulses. Melissa tore off her headphones and groaned, "Oh my God, not again." The alarm blared its shrill, mechanical scream a second later, loud enough to make my ears ring. We grabbed our coats and shoes and filed out into the hall with the rest of the floor. Students shuffled toward the stairwell, some annoyed, some half asleep. I remember the way the stairwell smelled. Faint smoke mixed with cold concrete and the sourness of too many people crammed together. Someone behind me muttered, "It's probably nothing." Outside, the snow was already ankle deep. We gathered in clusters on the lawn in front of Ashford, our breath rising in pale clouds. Red lights from the fire truck flickered across the brick facade. The RAs counted heads, though they always seemed too disorganized to be sure if everyone was actually out. I wrapped my coat tighter, watching as firefighters hauled hoses inside, their boots crunching against the ice. It wasn't until we were let back in, maybe half an hour later, that I realized something strange had happened. Melissa and I trudged back to our room, stamping snow off our shoes. When we pushed open the door, I noticed right away that the window was still open a crack, and the cold air had made the room sharper, emptier. But it was the silence that struck me most. No fan, no distant voices, no hallway chatter. Just silence. And then a sound that didn't fit. The faint hiss of breathing, except Melissa was right beside me. I turned sharply, and of course no one else was there. Just the dim room, our twin beds, and the faint smell of smoke still drifting through the vents. I shook it off. Stress, lack of sleep, nerves. But later that night, lying awake long after Melissa had fallen asleep, I overheard something through the wall. Our neighbor, Amanda, was on the phone with someone. Her voice was muffled, but I caught fragments. I don't know why. I swear I didn't hear it, everyone else did. No, I wasn't asleep. She sounded panicked, her words tumbling fast. The next morning, I asked her casually in the dining hall what had happened. She looked pale, her tray untouched. She said she'd been in her room the whole time, working on a project, and didn't hear the alarm at all. Not the blaring siren, not the flashing lights in the hall, nothing. She claimed she only realized something was wrong when a firefighter banged on her door and pulled her out. I laughed nervously and said maybe her ears were messed up from headphones, but she shook her head. I wasn't wearing any. I don't know. I just kept feeling like I shouldn't leave. Shouldn't leave? I repeated. She hesitated before saying, like someone was telling me it was fine to stay put. I thought I was imagining it, but it felt real, like a voice not in my ears but in my head. Soft, calm. It told me not to move. I didn't know what to say to that. Over the next week, Amanda started skipping classes. She kept her door locked. Sometimes when I passed, I thought I heard whispering inside, but whenever I knocked, she said she was fine. Melissa thought she was just shaken up, maybe embarrassed. But I couldn't forget the way her voice had trembled when she told me about the whisper point one night. Maybe a week later, I woke to a faint beeping in the hall. Not the alarm, but something softer, like a smoke detector with a dying battery. I sat up, heart pounding, thinking it was starting again. But when I stepped into the hall, everything was dark and still. No lights, no beeping, just the draft of cold air seeping under the stairwell door. The next morning, Amanda was gone. Her bed stripped, her desk cleared. The RA said she'd taken a leave of absence. That was all anyone told us. But sometimes, even now, when I walk past old brick buildings in the winter, I swear I catch that same acrid smell of overheated wires, and I remember the pulse of the red lights under the door, the way the alarm screamed in my ears, and the fact that Amanda never heard it. What unsettles me most is not the silence, though. It's the way she described that voice. Soft, calm, convincing. I think about it whenever I'm alone in a quiet room. I wonder if, when the next alarm sounds, I'll hear it too, or if I'll hear something else instead.